A very warm welcome to this focus session. What a day, right? Women in Tech. Always such great energy, inspiring people, new connections, all in one place. This is my fourth year attending, and it's always a pleasure to be here. My name is Saraprit Kaur, and I'm a technical engineering manager at FDJ United. I'll be facilitating this session today. We have two incredible speakers joining us on stage shortly who will be sharing their perspectives and real world insights on the topic when pressure is the product leading to clarity in regulated AI driven systems. Towards the end of the session, you will also have a chance to ask questions. So keep in mind as we go along. But before we go there, I want to ask you a quick question. It's an easy one, and I'll give you options. What is FDJ United? Raise your hands if you think it is a football club. We did get that last year, maybe because of United in our name, or maybe of a cool vibe, right? Raise your hands if you think it's an airline company. No one. Raise your hands if you think it's an online gaming company. Okay. Many of you know, many of you don't know us. All right. Maybe because of our recent rebranding. So last year also we received a lot of questions about who we are and what we do. So I want to share the interesting fact is that this is our 10th year with Women in Tech. So we'd like to share a little bit more about who we are. So these are all our brands. FDJ United is a multi-product, multi-brand, multi-market online betting and gaming company. Across the group, we have more than 15 brands. Unibet, Maria Casino, Otto, Bingo.com, Vlad Casino, just to name a few. We operate at a global scale with a strong B2C presence across markets like Australia, France, Sweden, Spain, the Netherlands, United Kingdom, and few more, as you can see on the screen. Today, we are proud to be one of the top gaming operators in Europe with around 5,000 employees and over 33 million customers. And with that scale comes something important, responsibility. Responsibility for player safety. And we take this responsibility seriously. We actively invest in this. How? Here we can see a few examples. 10% of our advertising budget goes directly into awareness and safer gambling campaigns. But beyond awareness, we also focus on action. We use data and AI to detect and even predict harmful behavior before they escalate into something serious. And this isn't just theoretical. In 2025 alone, our teams made over 25,000 proactive outreach calls across the group, reaching out to potentially vulnerable players before they even had to ask for help. And these actions show that we are not just trying to react to problems. We are designing systems that are anticipating risk and communicating clearly and intervening as early as possible to ensure player safety. Now we know about us. And coming to today's topic, when pressure is the product, everywhere, everyone is talking about AI. Some are fascinated by it, some are scared, some even fear that it might wage a war on humanity. We don't know about that. But one thing is sure that it has made product delivery faster than ever before. In middle of this AI buzz, it is easy to lose sight of something fundamental. The most important part of any product is still the user. And for the user, it doesn't matter what AI model was used or what system architecture sits behind it. What they experience is the product through the interface, from interaction to interaction. And why clarity is critical for the user is what we are going to talk about today. So please welcome on stage Yendi Furman and Gathani Mugwe.
So picture this, everyone. It's a packed Tuesday, as usual. You've had a day full of meetings, and you're walking out of one of them and walking right into the next one. The super important, highly critical, needed by yesterday feature review. In the room, waiting for you, product, engineering, data, compliance, commercial, operations, etc., etc., etc. All of them there to approve the launch of a feature that uses AI to detect risky behavior and restrict the customer's account. Everyone thinks this is a great idea. This has gone perfectly well. The AI model is accurate. Compliance has signed up. Engineering has built it cleanly. Operations says they can handle the volume. And legal has approved the disclosure language. So everyone has done their job. The next question is, are we ready to ship? And everyone in the room says, yes, of course, we're good to go.
Now, picking up from where Yendi, how many of us are currently in product facing roles in tech, engineering, marketing, ops, compliance? Yeah. Now, we're also users, so we're going to flip the view. You're the user now. You're mid session on the app, something goes wrong. Nothing that you're really aware of. You wonder what's happening, but you don't know. So you try again. Your account is restricted, and all the screen tells you is that your account access has been limited. There's no context and no way to take the next step. So you keep trying, you get the same screen. You go to customer support, you try and find the help. You wait and you wait, you get frustrated, and the only thing on your mind is, why? Why is this happening to me now?
So we get the picture, right? We get the gist of it. This is exactly what we're here to talk about today. What happens when a system works perfectly, technically, legally, operationally, and still fails the customer using it? But before we get deeper into that, let me introduce ourselves. My name is Yendi. I'm a senior product and behavioral designer. I've worked all my life as an industrial designer and in consumer psychology before I jumped into the digital world. That means that what I bring to every project or product that I work in is a habit of thinking in systems. What triggers an action? What constrains it? What happens when it goes wrong? And who feels it? I work at the intersection of business goals, user needs, and complex regulated environments where the margin for error is really small. And she is.
I'm Gadoni, Senior UX Content Designer, working alongside Yendi day to day. Born and raised in Kenya, been living in Sweden now for 12 years. And my background, slightly different from Yendi's, is an unusual mix of front end development, media management, and marketing. A little bit more technical. And what that means is that I think about content not just as words or nice things to have, but more as structure, like an engineer with the architecture. Because language is a system, it's not just the words. We're looking at everything holistically. And like Yendi, I also work at the intersection of user needs, business goals, and complex regulated environments, previously in fintech and in the last few years in online gaming. I've also had the opportunity to work across 9 brands, multiple markets, 10 plus languages. And what that teaches you very fast is that the words in your product, they don't just describe the system, they are the product as far as the user is concerned.
Our previous experience of what we've been through in different companies have given us the knowledge to kind of deal with the day-to-day basis of what we explained today. What we just described, that gap between the meeting room and the user screen, that is something that we've encountered a lot. It's something that affects the user directly. It's not a bug. It didn't necessarily come from negligence. It's because the pressure was treated as something to manage internally rather than something that the user would feel. We encounter high tension moments like this where the system knows a lot, but the user knows almost nothing.
What that happens then is that we experience is it becomes a UX problem, but it isn't a UX problem. It's everybody's problem. With a show of hands, has your team ever shipped something that technically worked very well internally, but ended up raising and having customer support drowning in tickets? Oh, yeah, it's a very common experience that we also see day to day. When that happens, a lot of our systems, which are automated, and when they lack clarity, users get confused, they get frustrated, sometimes they leave. A locked account, like we showed you, restricted, access not possible, will generate support tickets. There'll be escalations, and eventually that affects the costs. But importantly, as I've mentioned, customers' trust gets eroded slowly and slowly. And what we learn is that once that trust has been eroded, it gets very expensive to rebuild.
So, as Gatoni just said, this is the day to day we live now. So, let's be specific about the environment we're currently building and designing products in. Nowadays, we are creating systems where the decisions happen automatically, triggered by AI models in real time before any human can review them. This, in the gambling industry where we work, it works or looks like what Sarb mentioned at the beginning. A AI detection model that detects a slight change in behavior and restricts deposits or gameplay automatically, immediately. What most people don't realize is that these models were designed in direct response to regulatory changes. They are trying to be more efficient or more effective, but they are also restricted or constrained by regulations themselves. In high-risk contexts like this, that means that these models are required to be explainable, auditable, and fair. Effectiveness isn't enough anymore. The burden is on the business to um, let the users know or the environment knows that they are protecting people, not only excluding them.
And where we work, where clarity is expected, both within the business and for the user, it becomes a competitive advantage. Businesses that can take clarity and enforce it clearly, coherently for the user will build durable trust. And the ones that can't, which happens a lot in our industry, they end up facing fines and sometimes loss of license. We often talk about UX and clarity like it's a something nice to have at the end, you know. UX will take care of it. We get to hear that a lot. Where we work, where automated decisions are making decisions about customers' access, their money, and their advantage of being treated fairly, safety becomes a requirement. And here's the part that we don't talk about enough and that doesn't get said out loud. Every decision that all of us make in that room, in that Tuesday meeting, that decides what a customer can and cannot see, what we can and cannot surface, becomes an ethical one. And that is a different kind of responsibility than what most of us were hired for. But in our day to day work, it's what we are supposed to be designing for.
So let's talk about how what Gattoni said breaks. Not in the dramatic ways, in the quiet structural ways that it's way more harder to catch. One of the failures that we've seen most often is that language and behavior are being designed separately. For example, engineers, data teams, product teams, they design what the product does, what the logic is, when to trigger the action, and then later in the process, a content on or a copy lands on a screen that says your account has been restricted. At that point, the system wasn't designed to explain itself. The content is carrying the weight of decisions that were made without it.
And that's when the language breaks. Not because it's bad or the words don't make sense, but they are carrying and trying to explain something that the system was never built to support. Going back to our earlier example with the account restricted, a player mid session receives a responsible gambling intervention that they trigger, and they receive the screen saying their deposit limit has been reduced. There's not much context in it. They don't know, why did this happen? What am I supposed to do next? It only then next says, we've updated your account settings to support safer play. What does that really mean? And in that room, compliance approved it, said it's compliant. But it doesn't really tell the user anything about what just happened, what they're supposed to do, and how they can remedy that and take care of that situation. But the content team wrote the best that they could with what they were given. Sometimes next to nothing, sometimes quite vague. And what we found is that a lot of the times it's because the engineers, the data scientists, and ops and compliance are only focused on that one single screen that restricts access, but never really considered what does the user see upstream coming into the screen and downstream as part of their screen interaction to interaction.
So this sounds great in the in paper, in the logic in the background, but let's see how what this means down the line. Users who don't understand what happened contact customer support. That's operational cost increasing. Users who feel mistreated disengage. That's churn going up. Users who feel that a system is only treating them as targets lose trust. And that's long time revenue risk. These aren't soft metrics, they are commercial, operational, and regulatory consequences. And they all trace back to a design decision made early in the process or not made at all. So, why do you think this keeps happening? Why do language and behavior keep being designed separately? Part of the answer is that the people that are responsible for building the systems and the one who are responsible for communicating it are not always aligning in the same moment. So Gattoni and I have worked together to work a way around this issue. When we are designing a system and mapping out the tension moments, we are asking ourselves questions from two different perspectives at the same time. I'm thinking, what triggers an action? What model? What rules? What thresholds? What constrains it? Are they regulatory constraints, technical, operational? What the system reveals when it acts? All of that, it's behavior. It's the architecture of what happens.
And I come in, you can think of it like, scaffolding. We've got a lot of it happening in Stockholm. where we fill in the gaps. And I'm looking at what does the user need to understand in this very moment, right now? Not what is technically accurate, which tends to be the default, not what legal or compliance has approved, but what actually helps the user, the customer in the product in that moment for them to understand what just happened to them. How are they feeling? Maybe confused, maybe curious, possibly anxious, which happens a lot. What do they need to do next? And what language needs to make that navigable? I mentioned earlier I've worked across several different languages. That's looking at not just English, and that what happens is English tends to be used as a default, but many product users are not native English speakers. English is, for most people, a second language. So you look at English is what most people speak, but how does that localize into other languages and other markets which have varying tones of voice across different customer journeys? That's the interpretation. And that's how the system action becomes a human experience.
As Gadoni said, I also come in thinking about the environment, the physical aspect of it, how users interact with our service. So as you can see, these two perspectives complement each other. We both can confirm that behavior and language are not experienced separately by people. When an automated action fires, the timing, the message, all the available options, the interaction patterns, all collide into a single moment. And they have to answer three key questions: what happened, why it happened, and what comes next for the customer. If those things were designed separately by different people at different stages without speaking to each other, the users fills the gap, even if they can't name what's wrong.
And we really want to be direct here because this is a pattern that we experience across multiple teams that we have worked in. The content arrives late. Many times, if you ask lots of content designers, it becomes, hey, can you just edit this, just this little text or the button or the error message, right? And it's usually because engineering has already locked in everything. The logic is locked in. Everything has been approved. But we don't want to blame anybody. What we see here is a process gap, and it's fixable. But everyone in the process needs to understand why this matters, not just for the business, not just for our own KPIs or OKRs that we're trying to achieve, but also for the user. Because behavior plus language is one single experience, and they cannot be designed separately.
By a show of hands here, let me know who here has experienced these breaks in experiences, things that we should change, things that we see are not necessarily in the best way, happened in their day to day. And who, by raise of hand, feel that they have the authority or the ownership to stop a launch or change the timeline or the deadline to be able to fix that. Not as many. If you see around, not as many. So, in these moments where a lot of us see the friction happens, is when pressure becomes information. It tells us internally, for example, when product compliance, data, they are all trying to solve a different version of the same problem. Or when nobody knows who's responsible to make the automated decision legible. Or when drop offs support volumes and escalations are so high that they are affecting revenue. On the other hand, externally, it's when our users are feeling confused, distressed, or blocked by an automated action they didn't understand. When a pop up message or a notification didn't make sense. When our users start losing trust and stop using our service because they're feeling confused or frustrated. Here, knowing how to identify those signals and react to them is how most of us who are not in the position of stop a launch or delay a deadline can show leadership.
And so the question becomes, what do we actually do about it when you're not the person closest to stopping a launch, but you're the one closest to where it breaks? And let's look at this concretely, following what Yandi has said. It looks like us being in that room, in the product review, and asking, what does the user see in this moment? And taking a step further and going, what do they need to understand in this very moment to take the next step and complete this action? And collectively, for all of us, it looks like pushing back just a little and saying, we cannot write our way out of a system that wasn't designed to explain itself. It can also look like weeding through the data, talking to customer support, and picking up that ticket, taking it to a sprint planning, and saying, hey, you know that issue, the one we keep receiving about 50 times a week? That's a design issue, not a customer support problem.
Who thinks they need leadership or they need like a leadership title specifically to make this happen or to ask those questions? You're right. We don't. None of this requires an official title. Because when speed starts to look like recklessness, what's required of us is judgment and the willingness to slow down when everything is pushing for speed. Good leadership speaks through safer platforms, clearer decisions, and fewer people confused. It brings the right expertise early enough so that decisions can still be made rather than patched. There is a version of that Tuesday meeting that maybe most of us are familiar with that nobody asked the user question. The feature ships, it works technically, and 3 weeks later, chaos. Everybody's running around trying to make urgent changes. Support is flooded. And a regulator is asking for an audit trail. And somebody is trying to retrofit an explanation to a system that wasn't built to give one. Do you agree this is not a hypothetical scenario?
We experience it a lot. And the honest part is that sometimes, even though we put up our hand and ask those questions, the outcomes we want to have are not always guaranteed because we are all working under tight deadlines, time constraints, lots of other different constraints, as well as regulation deadlines that we have to adhere to every single day. And sometimes, unfortunately, clarity loses, and not intentionally. Sometimes that feature will ship, and we will experience those problems. But the work at the end of the day still matters. Putting up that hand, asking clarifying questions to understand how this affects our users. How does that impact down the line with all our functions within the business? Because the users deserve much better than a system that fails them. And for Yendi and myself, that's how we've learned to treat the business, product managers and engineers and data and compliance and ops as stakeholders, where their needs must be interpreted and not just taken at face value. Let's go back to that Tuesday meeting. The same room, the same feature, but this time looks a little bit different because product and content design are in the room from the beginning. We're there, present, not just to write some words or paint some UI, but really present, asking the questions. What happens when the user is in this place? What does the system see? What fires? What does the user understand? And when does that happen? When we need to surface what for them to see? And that didn't happen for us by accident.
That's leading in the margins. It is not a single moment of speaking up and raising your hand and saying, hey, please, 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 let's not do this. It's the consistent work of asking the right questions and making the cost until the default changes. We know that we've given you a lot to think about and a lot of elements that need to fit in all in one single moment. But that's why we want to make this as practical as possible. Because what we've been talking about isn't aimed at designers only. It's for everyone who builds a system that acts on people. So regardless of your role, this is what this asks. If you work on the model, the AI model, the logic definition, the data, the rules, etc., design your intervention models as in detailedly as you design your happy path. Know where the system will act under pressure. Make sure that you're familiar with that. Define what the system must expose and name those constraints early. And treat regulatory requirements as design inputs because they actually shape what the user are entitled to understand. All of that belong in the architecture.
And we fill that in if you're working with the communication, the support, the experience, and the design, the content, the language. It's trying to design for the moments of confusion. Many times, the edge cases get forgotten. And that's where we find moments of clarity that can inform the happy path as well. Let's also prioritize user understanding over internal logic. Not what the system wants to say, but what does the user need to understand, which is very different. Internally, we speak one language. Externally, customers understand something completely different. It's also taking those support tickets and using them as diagnostics to inform the journeys that we're designing for, finding the clarity, where customers dropping off, why are they dropping off, what's missing in this place. And that we have found is where we can focus.
And for all of us, let's try and remember to bring the people who knows our customers before the logic is locked in. Not as a handoff, as a collaborator from the start.
And now, taking everything we've spoken about, everything we've worked through, want to close with something that keeps running in this conversation. Clarity is not polish. It's not the nice to have at the end of the design process, writing some words, fixing something here, kind of like a band-aid, you know? Because when in regulated systems where automated decisions are being made at scale, there's real consequences for our users, for the business, and finding that clarity is how we can ensure that safety remains and scales properly.
Exactly as Gatoni is mentioning, a system that works technically but cannot explain itself is not finished. The gap between what the system knows and what the user understands is a design problem, but it's also a data problem, a compliance problem, a support problem, a commercial problem, and I could go on and on and on. Solving it belongs to everyone who builds the system.
And bringing you back now, as we build that system, think about the last time an automated decision in your product was made on behalf of a user. It could be a restriction, a flag, an error, a limit, or a block. Now, could your user explain what just happened to them? Why did it happen? And what should they do next? And if that's not the case, that's where the work lies. And that's what we keep fighting for in the margins every single day. Thank you.
Wow, that was fantastic. Thank you, Yendi and Githoni. A really relevant and impactful message. A system that cannot explain itself is unfinished. And I really liked how you ended with a question for our lovely audience. Now it's your chance to ask them questions. Do you have any questions for our speakers? All right. You have one here.
I'm going to break the rules. These are my girls, and wow, yeah, very proud. But all in all fairness, I've got a bit of an advantage. I know a lot about this company. I worked for them for quite a few years, and we have a strategic goal of reducing our revenue from harmful gambling. It's called Journey Towards Zero. That's what we call it internally, and you know, every year on year, we've tried to reduce that number, and you know, it goes up now and then. But do you believe that AI is the way forward, so that we're relying less on human-based decisions that are reactive and lead us into a more proactive um, way forward for the user? What do you feel about that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. We definitely agree that AI has created an advantage, mainly for us in the regulated environment that we work in, where we try to prevent harmful or risky behavior from users. Of course, having a proactive approach rather than a reactive one helps a lot in helping users or people fight off the risk of gambling, like addiction and all of that. So we do agree that AI is a super helpful feature, or however you want to call it, that can help us in our day-to-days. Of course, all that we've exposed here today is how to implement those AI models and how to communicate to the user when they take decisions in the background.
I can, yeah, thank you so much for your question. And thank you, Andy. I'll look at it from a very different perspective because I practically buried in the language within the product. And one of the things is AI has been really good. The, what tends to happen is it's really important that there's a human in the loop working with the AI as a collaborator and not so much using it to do the work. Lots of people can write a little bit, could use the AI like ChatGPT or Claude to write for you some content that would go within the product. But what tends to happen is the AI model lacks the overview, aerial view of your entire product ecosystem, your entire customer experience, and what journeys actually in, interconnect, and how that language transfers from one customer journey to the next one with the entire product. And so, what I found in my experience is when you have built frameworks to understand the language models within your own product and how you're interpreting and applying language use, then it comes in much faster to actually help you build different frameworks for different use cases within your user flows. And then from there on, you're able to write much better because you can apply the tone of voice that's suitable, say, for example, for a regulation flow, like getting to know the customer, asking them for their ID verification, their address verification, or asking them to input payment information, for example. But then it would apply a completely different tone of voice when, say, you're asking a customer to, hey, we want to offer you 10% bonus on your next interaction with us. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Interesting.
Did anyone else have any questions?
There's one more question, yes.
I'm telling my company that we should work more with the requirements, which is my point of, this is the part of the requirement part. And they said, no, 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 we are agile. So one time the customers, the pharmacists and the pharmacists, they refused to use the system that we launched. So we had to pay a fine to, the others. And this was a really, really, really large fine. It was not good. It worked, but I said, shouldn't we start working with the requirements so we can build the right things so we don't have to pay these fines? And no, we're agile.
Yeah.
Have you experienced that? Have you, what do you say when people, no requirements, we're agile?
Yes. Yeah, and that's exactly what we were talking about. Like, leading from the margins is also trying to understand. So I learned this from a friend who's also in UX, where when you first start the job, or even internally as you're still working, many times is try and understand who your stakeholders are, who's responsible for what, and get to know people and talk about the work that you're doing, and also understand the work that they are doing. And that way also, when things come up, when people talk about, we have this initiative that's coming up in 2 weeks, or this coming up down the line, is proactively just reaching out and saying, hey, I saw this in the schedule, or in the Jira board, or for example, or in Confluence, came across this, that something's coming down the line. Is there any design UX person present? What are the requirements? Do you have any documentation that I can read and catch up on while you prepare everything else before you do like a gap analysis walkthrough or a technical walkthrough? One of the things also that has been really beneficial in my experience is trying to make also stakeholders understand that when the user wins, the business also wins. Because when a user can understand what's happening and you can sustain the trust along the journey, they continue staying with you, so that then that turns into a lifetime customer, more revenue down the line, less fines, because then also you're implementing a user experience that they can understand, that applies to them, but that also still meets business requirements. So there's that sweet spot of also understanding what does compliance really need to send out to the users, what can we disclose, but then it's turning that language from the legalese into what is appropriate for the customer in that moment, that they can take the next step and move on, but can also explain what's happening. Because also customers we are all customers, we are all users of all sorts of products. We want clarity. We don't want people hiding, what's happening within the product. If I'm restricted or something goes wrong, a payment goes wrong, you want to know what exactly happened. And when you know, you can calm down, like, okay, I know what's happening. I know what I can do next. I can either contact customer support, or they'll contact me, or I can wait a couple of hours and maybe it will be resolved because they've explained what this happened.
If I can jump in real quick, a little hack that I hoping that by this time my stakeholders are no longer like in the virtual room. Um, but a little hack that I could give you is that don't call it requirements, maybe. Call it something around what do we really need to like put out there? What does the user really need? What are the key things that we cannot miss? That is something that I use in the more like one-on-one conversations with the stakeholders that can convince them and put out the pressure of the requirement word,
Yeah.
and they can like lean in more or help you a little bit more when the requirement word it's out of the conversation, so you can define the requirements yourself with the things that they've already tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as a manager, I can see that it's a very common problem, and we all go through that, and devs complain about our pending requirements. But one thing we can do is to make it as customizable and configurable as possible, because if you wait for the 100% complete requirement, we'll be too late for the party. So this is part of the problem we have to work with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe I can close and just say one language that all of us understand, because we all have our goals that we need to achieve within our different teams, is what business outcome are we trying to achieve by building this feature and putting it out into the market? I think that's one question every single stakeholder understands and has their own little self ego tied to all of us. And so they're able to explain it quite clearly, then take all that interpretation and, yeah,
Yeah.
customize it for yourself.
Good question.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Here we have one.
Hello. Yandi, you mentioned that 3 weeks later, then it's chaos. And I understand that, of course, when the tickets are overflowing and things like that are happening, you understand that there's a flaw in the system. But how soon do you notice that something is wrong in the system? Is it really that the tickets are overflowing? It's like, oh crap, something's wrong here? Or are there other patterns you guys notice that others maybe don't recognize right away?
Yeah, like this was like a real exaggerated maybe example of a real key situation. Not always it's chaos like right away. We do rounds of testing, and we do also see like when a feature is failing within the rounds of testing, or maybe we also implement like A/B test or do like a soft launch and not to the all user based, just to see how the feature is behaving. If it goes well, then we escalate to another group of users and stuff like that. So we can flag any risks or anything that needs to be fixed before we implement it, like, I don't know, to the whole user base or to different market or escalate it to different markets. Another thing is that in regulatory environments, we kind of see or have some peaks in the year where a regulatory thing requirement that we thought was gonna work well, or we got a new head of legal that had a new interpretation of the law or something like that, and all of the sudden came. It's sometimes an issue of when it's like read in the logs and stuff like that. So it really depends. As I said, we have many different like the tools to test out and go that a feature goes through before implementing it for all of our users, that can help us mitigate that risk. But sometimes it does happen that it's all of the sudden out there, and we identify as a risk
Yeah.
later on.
I can answer that because it happened to me recently, actually. Thank you for your question. It's sometime one thing I'll say is, in my entire experience, is befriend your customer support and customer operations. They have the sweet data because they're talking to customers every single day. They're tracking the calls and the queries. We recently saw a spike in customer support contacts, in emails, chats, phone calls, but we couldn't understand why. But what helped was looking at the timeline when we had the spike and what went live, and then looking at that in comparison to tracking data within the product, which helped us identify we had a gap of a trigger that we needed to fulfill for safety play. And so small things like that can come up, but it's also having those conversations on a regular cadence. Yeah.
Nice. Any more questions? No? One tip I can share, which helped me coming from backend teams to leading front-end teams, is download your app, be your own user, and then you will see where the user is lacking the help. As Yendi and Gathoni mentioned, it's not just the job of designers, it's our shared responsibility. So one way to understand user is to be the user yourself.
Yeah.
All right. So if there are no more questions, we have some of the QR codes for you guys. You can connect to our speakers or to our company website and our company LinkedIn page. I'll give you.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think I need this. Powerful voice.
Go for it.
Yeah, so, hello,
Hello.
room. I'm actually tagging along on your question here. Are you, in any sense, using AI today proactively in your work?
Yes.
Yes.
You are.
Yes.
Yes.
So, I'm thinking, actually, what I'm interested in is what does users say about this? Like, could you, with language, change attitudes towards AI within your environment? I'm thinking gambling is about personal finances, and harmful gambling could be about a possible addiction, and it's sensitive stuff.
Yeah. So, what I write the language for the product. Even if someone sends me, because sometimes a product owner or a product manager or an engineer will give me some what we call protocopy to understand what's happening in the system. So I take that and I look at it alongside the requirements that you were talking about earlier, but also having conversations with compliance and legal, looking at every country has its own gambling commission with regulations about what you can talk about, how to use language. One of I'll give an example. Like in the UK, for example, we say safer gambling. Sabpreet at the beginning mentioned responsible gambling. And then also within a business, for example, for us, we say responsible gaming. So it's also really going into the weeds of the documentation. And that's where AI can help. So I use it in my workflow. It's part of my workflow in understanding what's happening and also getting summaries and also aligning on what's the language saying, what is the key thing for me to understand and analyze. But also the more you use it and train it, the better it gets, so that then each time you give it the prompt for it to analyze, it already understands how I think, what I'm looking for as a UX person, for key to understand. And then, of course, if I can't really see what I'm looking for, then I'll always go back into the actual documentation.
Yeah.
So
Sorry to interrupt you.
there is a lot of
Gathoni.
reading. It
We are over
happens, but
time,
yeah.
but interesting
I hope that-
conversation. You can continue this in our booth. We are just left to the entrance where we entered in the morning. Thank you once again to our speakers for sharing their insights and for the lovely audience.